All right, so today we're going to introduce the topic of federal and unitary systems of government that exist within the AP6, and basically talk about how states, or the 6 states that we talk about in AP comparative government, structure their government to delegate power throughout the country. So there are 2 main types of ways to do this, and they are federal and unitary systems. So here are the standards that go with the topic. And we'll first talk about federal states. So the thing you probably know the most about federal states has to do with the American style of government and the way that the U.S. government sort of sets aside various powers for the national government, but also sets aside various powers for state and local governments and sort of allows legislatures and courts at the state and local level to have certain powers. So that is kind of the essence of kind of what a federal state does. It divides power among different levels of government to confer a degree of autonomy within the decision-making process. So from the AP6, Mexico, Russia, and Nigeria are all considered to be federal states, but kind of different than the United States for a few different reasons. Mexico and Nigeria have governments that are very much structured like the US, but don't necessarily have the same level of delegation of powers to the state and local government. Basically for reasons related to kind of some of the lack of effectiveness of these sorts of governments within the country. And Russia just has a lot of interesting ways in which it delegates powers to different structures of government throughout the country. So thinking about this, reasons why a country would be set up as a federal state, or they would have different levels of government, basically to help represent local interests and to serve as a check on the power of the national government. So there's oftentimes a push and pull between state and national governments, as there is in the U.S. It is good for recognizing differences within different parts of the country in relationship to different laws and forms of taxation. And oftentimes you'll see that federal states are geographically larger or for some reason more difficult to govern. And that sort of checks out when you're thinking about Russia and the United States and Mexico and a few other examples. So just looking at Mexico for a second, you can see these are the different states that exist within Mexico. And we have the central government in Mexico City and kind of the state structure that, or Mexican states are structured very much the same as US states with their own courts and their own legislatures and governors and governments. And similarly, Nigeria has the same general setup with the capital in the middle of the country in Abuja, and then the 36 states that comprise Nigeria. So the different effects of federalism are that you have state and local courts and legislatures, that you organize countries in a way in which you have sub-state units. So in Mexico and Nigeria, we call these states. In Russia, there's kind of a variety of different ways we refer to sub-state units. So you'll see that in the next slide. So like we said before, you can incorporate regional differences within the legislature. So like in the United States, there's geographic representation taken into account within the Senate, kind of per state. Same thing in Mexico and Nigeria. So you see that happening within federal states. And like we said before, kind of differences between states in terms of laws and their application of law. Most notably, within Nigeria, Sharia law is used within parts of northern Nigeria with their courts. And one other thing I want to mention as it relates to federalism. So Russia practices what we would call asymmetrical federalism, essentially that you have different levels of power given to geographic entities at the sub-state level. So you have oblasts and kriegs and krays and republics and ukrugs. And republics are probably considered to have the most autonomy. These are essentially parts of the country that have some history of self-governance and have been incorporated into the country, oftentimes with their own constitutions, with their own leaders, and functioning in a lot of ways almost in a semi-autonomous type of way. So asymmetrical federalism allows essentially countries to sort of, or not countries, but geographic territory to kind of fall in under the umbrella of Russia while still having some degree of autonomy. such as Chechnya and Dagestan in Russia and a few other examples. So we will talk about that as we get to Russia. All right, and the yellow, let's see, the green territories on this map are countries in the world that are set up in a way that have a federal structure of government. So you can see, like we said, a lot of large geographic states are set up this way, with some exceptions, which we're going to get to. So one of those is China. You can see China, the largest unitary state in the world, and Iran as well. And then the UK is the third one from the AP6 that we talk about. That is a unitary state. So unlike federal states, political power is concentrated within one level of government in unitary states, so at the national level. So you have a restriction, or essentially not a delegation of power to local governments or state governments or sub-state governments. Sorta. and in the same way that the three countries with that Mexico, Russia, and Nigeria are not perfect federal states, we will see that these are not perfect unitary states either, because they have started and actually do have some forms in which they delegate power below the national level. So we'll talk about that and what that actually looks like. So reasons why a country has a unitary form of government. Essentially, that allows local interests are represented without regional political institutions. So essentially, their local interests are represented at the one level of government, kind of at the national level. So detractors would argue that this doesn't do as good a job as of kind of implementing these local interests, which I think is a critique that you would hear a lot. It allows for, so some of the benefits, I think, it allows for consistency in laws across countries, so you don't have various laws across the kind of that have to be interpreted differently across the country. The government might be more effective at implementing policies if there's only one level of government that has to do it. I think you can see in things like the coronavirus, and their kind of oftentimes federal governments struggled to effectively respond because you had a lot of required cooperation between different levels of government, and unitary states might not necessarily have this issue. And then some of the criticism would be it doesn't allow for regional or local differences the way that federal structures do. So one way you can kind of see this within the UK is within the House of Commons. So the House of Commons is the one policymaking apparatus at the national government for the UK. And you can see kind of the major parties that exist, the Conservative and the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. But you can also see some of the smaller regional parties that exist within the UK. This is the Scottish National Party, the Democratic Unionist Party, and Sinn Féin, and then Plaid Cymru, which is a party from Wales. So you actually, like we talked about before, kind of having the local interests at the national level. You can see that a little bit within the House of Commons makeup. Within China, so China has a unitary system of government. Basically, the Chinese Communist Party having a way in which there's a lot of local administration that exists within the CCP, but it doesn't necessarily delegate large amounts of power to local and state governments. They just have sort of representatives from the CCP in charge of certain parts of the country. So they don't have this sort of delegation of power. There are some autonomous regions that exist within China, most notably Xinjiang, which is up here, where a mostly minority group of Muslim population lives, and then Tibet. And I think the term autonomous doesn't really work super well because those parts of the country probably face more restrictions than the non-autonomous parts of China. All right, and lastly, I wanted to talk about the term devolution. So that is connected a little bit to this topic, because you have kind of, so devolution is the process by which states can delegate additional powers to local and regional governments. So this is important in the context mostly of the United Kingdom, which is a unitary country or unitary state, as we talked about, but has actually devolved large amounts of power to Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales, mostly in the form of their own national parliaments. So this cool looking building here is the Scottish National Parliament. And like we talked about before, the Scottish National Party acts as a small party in the House of Commons, but as the majority party within the Scottish Parliament. So you have local Scottish issues basically um, handled at the level of Scottish Parliament. So it's different than the federal structure, but it oftentimes has the same sort of outcome within the UK. So all of this is confusing. It will make a lot more sense as we go through country by country and talk about what federal or unitary actually means in the context of this country. So right now, I would remember kind of which country falls into which category, and we will look at this a lot more as the year progresses. Okay, bye.